Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we start, I need to tell you something important. Some of these stories were hidden by the government. They didn't want anyone to know what really happened up there. Tonight, we have 8 most disturbing true Alaska mountain horror stories. And these aren't made up. These really happened to real people. Imagine this: workers digging in the frozen ground and finding bodies that should have stayed buried. A hunting guide who finds something terrible in a cave, something connected to his own family. And trust me, it gets worse from there. These stories come from construction workers, guides, and people who were just doing their jobs in the mountains. Some of them made it home, some of them didn't. But they all saw something they can never forget. Distractious. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. We share the scariest true stories on YouTube. And don't forget the notification bell so you never miss our videos. It's getting dark. The mountains are quiet. But something up there is watching. Let's start with our first story. And I'm warning you, after tonight, you might never want to visit Alaska again.
My name is Jake Martinez, and I've been working construction for 12 years. Started as a laborer right out of high school, worked my way up to foreman by the time I was 25. I've built everything from shopping centers in Phoenix to oil platforms in North Dakota. The pay's good, the work's honest, and I thought I'd seen every kind of job site danger there was. Cave-ins, equipment failures, falls from height. I knew how to handle all of it. But what happened last March in Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about construction work. About what can be buried under the ground we dig up every day. The job was a pipeline expansion project about 60 miles southeast of Mount Denali. 12 of us flew up from the lower 48 to work the foundation phase before the main crew arrived. The money was too good to pass up, triple overtime for 3 months of work in the middle of nowhere. My buddy Danny Reeves and I had worked together for 6 years, so when he signed on, I did too. The site was nothing but frozen wilderness. Permafrost layer went down maybe 8 feet before hitting bedrock. Our job was to blast and excavate foundation trenches for the pump stations. Standard procedure: use the pneumatic hammers to break through the frost, then excavators to clear the debris. First 2 weeks went smooth. Weather stayed around -10, which was actually warm for March up there. Our heated trailer had decent internet, the food was better than most job sites, and the work was straightforward. We'd blast in the morning, excavate after lunch, repeat until we hit our daily footage target. I started filming everything with my phone. Figured my wife would want to see what Alaska looked like, and the guys back home always got a kick out of seeing the crazy places construction takes you. Plus, the landscape was incredible. Mountains everywhere, aurora at night, not a single building visible in any direction. March 18th. We hit something different. Danny was running the Caterpillar excavator on section 7 when his bucket punched through what should have been solid permafrost. Instead of the usual mix of dirt and ice, chunks of something dark came up. At first, we thought it was old timber, or maybe coal deposits. But when Danny dumped the load, I could see it wasn't wood. It was perfectly preserved human bodies. I had my phone out, filming Danny's reaction when we both realized what we were looking at. The permafrost had kept them frozen for God knows how long. Their clothes looked like something from the 1800s. Wool coats, leather boots, canvas pants. But what really caught my attention were the bite marks. Every single body had bite marks on the arms and legs. Human bite marks, but the teeth marks were wrong. Too sharp, too deep. Like someone had filed their teeth to points before biting. "Jesus, Jake," Danny said, climbing down from the cab. "What do you think happened to them?" I kept filming as we examined the bodies. There were 7 of them, all adult men. Their faces were gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Their fingernails had grown long, almost claw-like. Most disturbing were their mouths. Their lips had pulled back, showing teeth that definitely weren't normal. Pointed, yellowed, filed to sharp tips. "Probably miners," I said, trying to sound professional. There were gold prospecting camps all through here in the 1,890 seconds. Must have gotten trapped in a winter storm. Danny nodded, but he wasn't really listening. He was staring at one of the bodies, a younger guy, maybe 25 years old. The man's eyes were still open, perfectly preserved by the ice. yellow eyes. Not brown or hazel that had faded, actually yellow, like a wolf's. That's when Danny did something stupid. He pulled off his work glove and touched the dead man's hand. "Danny, don't," but he'd already made contact. The moment his bare skin touched the dead corpse, the dead man's fingers seemed to twitch. Just a muscle spasm from the temperature change, but it spooked us both. Danny jerked his hand back, and I saw he'd cut his palm on something sharp. Blood was dripping onto the frozen ground. "Damn thing had something in its hand," Danny muttered, wrapping his cut with a shop rag. "Felt like broken glass." We reported the find to our site supervisor, who called it in to the state authorities. Standard procedure for historical remains. They told us to flag the area and work around it until an archaeologist could come examine the site. Could be days or weeks before anyone showed up. That evening, something was wrong with Danny. He came to dinner but didn't eat anything. Just sat there pushing food around his plate while the rest of us talked about the day's work. When I asked if he was feeling okay, he said he was hungry but nothing looked good to him. "Everything smells wrong," he said, "like it's rotten or something." But our food was fine. We had a full-time cook, fresh supplies flown in twice a week. I was eating the same pot roast Danny was staring at, and it tasted perfect. Around 10 p.m., I went to the kitchen trailer to grab a late snack. That's when I found Danny in the walk-in cooler, eating raw hamburger straight from the package. Not just nibbling, tearing into it like an animal. His hands were covered in blood and grease, and he was making these soft growling sounds while he ate. I started filming immediately. Something was seriously wrong with my friend. "Danny? What the hell are you doing?" He looked up at me with those same yellow eyes I'd seen on the corpse. For just a second, I thought I was seeing things. But then he blinked, and they were brown again. "I don't know, man," he said, looking down at the bloody meat in his hands. Nothing else satisfied the hunger. This is the first thing that's tasted right all day." Over the next 3 days, I documented everything with my phone. Danny's fingernails grew visibly longer each day. He stopped eating cooked food entirely, only raw meat from our freezer supplies. His voice changed, becoming deeper and more guttural. He started speaking in whispers, like his throat was damaged. Most disturbing was how he moved. Danny had always been graceful for a big guy, but now he moved like a predator. Silent steps, head tilted like he was listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. On the 4th night, I followed him. I kept my distance and filmed as Danny walked back to the excavation site. The area was marked off with orange safety fencing, but he ducked right under it. Using my phone's night vision, I watched him kneel beside the preserved bodies. And then I watched him eat pieces of them. He tore flesh from their arms with his bare hands, stuffing it into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in weeks. The sounds he made weren't human, wet tearing noises mixed with satisfied groans. His teeth had definitely changed, becoming sharp and pointed just like the corpses. I was so horrified I almost dropped my phone, but I kept filming. I had to document this. The next morning, I searched online for any historical records about the area. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1897, a group of miners had been trapped by early winter storms in this exact location. Rescue parties found evidence of cannibalism, human bones with knife marks, accounts of hunger madness spreading through the camp like a disease. The territorial authorities had classified it as death by starvation, but witness accounts described something much worse. Miners who had resorted to eating human flesh couldn't stop. They developed an insatiable hunger for more human meat, even when regular food became available. Their teeth grew sharp, their fingernails elongated, and they began hunting other miners like animals. The records described it spreading like an infection. Anyone who touched the infected or consumed infected flesh would develop the same symptoms within days. The territorial government had quietly burned all the evidence and officially blamed the deaths on avalanche. But clearly, they hadn't found all the bodies. I realized with growing horror that Danny had been infected the moment he touched that corpse. And if it spread through contact, I checked my own fingernails. They looked normal. But as I stared at them, I swear they seemed longer than they'd been that morning. The hunger started that afternoon. At first, it was just regular hunger. But when I sat down for lunch, everything smelled rotten. The soup looked like vomit, the bread smelled moldy, even the coffee tasted like dirt. The only thing that smelled good was the raw steaks in the kitchen trailer. I tried to fight it. I knew what was happening to me. But the hunger was overwhelming, consuming every thought. By evening, I was filming myself tearing into raw caribou meat like a savage animal. My voice in the recording was deeper, more growling than human speech. Day 7, I whispered to the camera. The infection is spreading. I can feel my teeth changing. God help me, the meat tastes so good. Within 2 weeks, 8 of our 12-man crew was infected. I documented all of it. Their eyes turning yellow, teeth growing sharp, fingernails extending into claws. We stopped using tools for hunting the local wildlife. Our bare hands were more effective. I filmed myself killing a rabbit with my teeth and eating it while it was still alive. The blood was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Looking at my reflection in my phone's camera, I could see my face becoming gaunt and predatory. My cheekbones were more pronounced. My eyes had yellow flecks, and when I smiled, my teeth were pointed like a shark's. But the worst part was losing my humanity piece by piece. I could feel my mind changing along with my body. Human thoughts were getting harder to hold on to. The hunger was becoming the only thing that mattered. The 4 uninfected workers had started sleeping together in one trailer, taking turns keeping watch. They'd stopped talking to us, stopped making eye contact. They knew something was wrong, but they had no idea how wrong. On day 19, I filmed the infected crew planning to hunt them. We gathered around the fire pit after the uninfected workers had gone to bed. But instead of talking about work or home, we discussed hunting strategies. How to separate the healthy ones, which would taste the best, how to keep them alive longest for fresh meat. I was participating in planning to eat my friends, men I'd worked with for years. And the most terrifying part was how natural it felt. I set up cameras around the camp that night to record what happened. I had to document this, even though I knew I was about to become a monster. The footage shows us stalking through the camp like a pack of wolves, moving silently, communicating with hand signals and soft growls. When we broke into their trailer, the uninfected workers didn't even have time to scream. I filmed myself biting into my best friend Tommy's neck. The blood was warm and perfect. For the first time in weeks, the hunger was completely satisfied. We spent 3 hours eating them, all 4 of them. I have it all on video, every terrible, inhuman moment. In my final coherent recording, I explained what I'd learned. The infection spreads through any contact with infected flesh or bodily fluids. The permafrost had preserved the original victims from 1,897, keeping the disease dormant but viable. Climate change was melting permafrost across Alaska, potentially releasing more infected corpses. I buried my phone in a waterproof case before I completely lost my humanity. Someone needed to find this evidence, understand the danger. The last thing I remember as Jake Martinez was the overwhelming urge to run, to hunt, to find fresh meat in the wilderness. My phone's GPS tracked my movement for weeks after that final recording. The data shows me traveling over 200 miles from the original site, moving constantly, never stopping for more than a few hours. The final GPS coordinates place me deep in the Alaskan wilderness, still moving when the battery finally died. 6 months later, a cleanup crew found the construction site. 12 workers officially listed as missing in an avalanche, but the site was littered with human bones and torn clothing. DNA testing confirmed cannibalism on all recovered remains. The government classified the incident to prevent panic about permafrost dangers. But similar disappearances have been reported at 8 other construction sites across Alaska. Always the same pattern. Crews vanish when permafrost melts, reveal preserved human remains. My phone footage became classified evidence in a federal investigation. Construction companies now avoid areas with known burial sites. But the permafrost keeps melting, releasing more infected corpses from over a century ago. Workers still disappear when ancient burial grounds are accidentally uncovered, and somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, something that used to be Jake Martinez is still hunting, still hungry, still spreading the infection to anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working as a bank teller for 4 years while studying astronomy part-time at the University of Alaska. I know that sounds like a weird mix, but the bank job pays for my classes and telescope equipment. I've always been fascinated by the northern lights since I was a kid. My grandmother used to tell me stories about how the aurora were spirits dancing in the sky. I never believed her then, but after what happened last October on Mount McKinley, I'm not so sure anymore. I've been photographing the aurora for 3 years now. Started as a hobby, but my astronomy professor said my pictures were good enough for scientific research. I had all the right gear: a Canon EOS camera with special lenses, GPS tracking equipment, and a computerized telescope mount that could follow objects across the sky. I wasn't some amateur with a phone camera. I knew what I was doing. The forecast for October 15th showed perfect conditions. Clear skies, minimal light pollution, and a strong geomagnetic storm predicted. This was going to be the best aurora display of the year. I took 3 days off work and drove my Jeep up to my usual spot, flat area about 8,000 feet up Mount McKinley. It's isolated, but that's what makes it perfect. No city lights, no interference, just me and the sky. I've done this trip dozens of times. Same route, same camping spot, same setup routine. I could practically do it blindfolded. But this time felt different from the moment I arrived. The air was too still, too quiet. Usually there are birds or wind or something. This time, nothing. I set up my equipment just before sunset. Telescope on its tripod, camera mounted and ready, GPS logger recording my exact position. Everything checked out normal on my equipment tests. GPS showed my coordinates as 63.0692 degrees north, 151.0074 degrees west, same as always. I ate dinner from my camp stove and waited for dark. The aurora started appearing around 9 p.m. At first, just a faint, green glow on the northern horizon. Then it exploded into the most incredible display I'd ever seen. Ribbons of green and blue light dancing across the entire sky. I started taking pictures immediately, adjusting my camera settings as the lights got brighter. That's when the first weird thing happened. My GPS started beeping error warnings. The display showed my location jumping around randomly. 1 second I was at my campsite, the next it said I was 50 miles east, then 30 miles south. I figured it was just interference from the aurora. Geomagnetic storms can mess with electronics. But then my camera started acting up too. The automatic focus kept hunting, like it couldn't lock onto anything. When I checked the pictures on the camera's screen, some of them showed my campsite from angles I hadn't taken. Pictures of my tent and equipment from the side, even though I'd been shooting straight up at the sky. I switched to manual focus and kept shooting. The aurora was too spectacular to waste time troubleshooting equipment problems. I'd deal with the technical issues later. Around 11 p.m., I decided to take a break and download the pictures to my laptop. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. In one of the photos, taken at 10:23 p.m., according to the timestamp, I could clearly see myself setting up equipment near my tent. But at 10:23, I had been sitting by my camera taking pictures of the sky, not walking around camp. I looked at more photos. Several showed me doing things I didn't remember doing. In one, I was unpacking gear from my Jeep. In another, I was writing in my notebook by the fire. But I hadn't written anything that night, and I'd unpacked hours earlier. I grabbed my notebook to check if I had somehow forgotten writing something. The pages were filled with entries in my handwriting, but I had no memory of writing them. The entries described weeks of observations from this same campsite. Detailed notes about aurora patterns, temperature readings, equipment calibrations. According to my own notes, I'd been here for 17 days straight. That was impossible. I'd arrived this morning and taken only 3 days off work, but the handwriting was definitely mine. I know my own writing. Some entries were dated weeks ago, others were from dates that hadn't happened yet. One entry, dated today, said, Day 17, still can't leave. Every path down the mountain leads back to camp. GPS shows impossible coordinates. Beginning to understand the pattern. Another entry in shakier handwriting said, Day 142, God help me, I've been here for months. Don't try to leave during the aurora. It only makes it worse. The electromagnetic field creates some kind of prison. My hands were shaking as I read another entry. Day unknown. Saw another version of myself today, setting up camp on the east side. She can't see me. We exist in the same space but different layers. The aurora fractures reality here. I looked up from the notebook and saw movement by my Jeep. There was someone there, silhouetted against the green aurora light. Someone wearing the same jacket I was wearing, with the same build and hair length. It was me. I watched myself, calm, this other version of me, calmly unloading equipment and setting up a second campsite maybe 100 feet away. I called out, but she didn't respond. I walked toward her, but she acted like I wasn't there. When I got close enough to see her face clearly, it was definitely my face. But her eyes looked tired, defeated, like she'd been here much longer than one day. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but my hand passed right through her like she was a hologram. She was real, but not real. In the same place, but not the same place. I ran back to my campsite and grabbed my camera. When I looked through the viewfinder, I could see multiple versions of myself scattered across the mountainside. Some were setting up equipment, others were packing to leave. One was sitting by a fire, looking terrified. All of them were me, but existing in what looked like different time periods. I took pictures, and they all showed up in the photos. The camera could see what my eyes could see. Whatever was happening here, it was real. I checked my GPS again. The coordinates were cycling through different locations every few seconds, but I wasn't moving. According to the device, I was simultaneously in dozens of different places. The aurora was doing something to space and time in this area. Over the next few hours, I watched more versions of myself appear. Some looked like they'd been here for days, others for weeks. One version looked sick and malnourished, like she'd been trapped for months. They all moved through their routines. Some setting up equipment, others desperately trying to pack and leave, one just sitting and crying. Around 3 a.m., one of the other versions of me finally noticed I was there. The one who looked like she'd been here for weeks. She walked over to my campsite, and this time she was solid, real. I could touch her. "You're new," she said, her voice hoarse. "How long have you been here?" "Since this morning," I said. "What is this place? What's happening to us?" "The aurora creates dimensional layers," she explained. "Every time there's a strong geomagnetic storm, reality splits into multiple versions. We're all the same person, but from different timelines that got trapped here at different times." She pointed to the other versions of ourselves scattered across the mountainside. "That one over there has been here for 6 months. The one by the rocks, she's been here for 2 years. Some of them don't remember their original lives anymore." As if to prove her point, I heard screaming from somewhere in the darkness. 2 versions of myself were fighting over supplies, clawing at each other like wild animals. The one who'd been here longer was trying to eat the other one. "They go insane," my companion said matter-of-factly. "Isolation, hunger, the constant aurora messing with their minds. Some of them become cannibals. They hunt the newer versions of us for food." "How do we get out?" I asked. "I've been trying to figure that out for weeks. The aurora electromagnetic field creates a prison. Every path down the mountain loops back here. But I think I've found a pattern. During aurora blackouts, those brief moments when the lights fade completely, the dimensional boundaries weaken. That might be when we can escape." She showed me notes she'd been keeping, tracking the aurora cycles. The blackouts happened every 4 to 6 hours during major storms. The next one should be around 7 a.m. We spent the remaining hours before dawn preparing. She'd figured out that moving during the blackout periods could shift you between dimensions. But there was a catch. Every time someone escaped, it seemed to trap another version in their place. The mountain demanded a sacrifice. As the aurora began to fade around 6:45 a.m., my companion started gathering her equipment. "This is my chance," she said. "I've been waiting weeks for conditions this perfect." "What about me?" I asked. "You'll have to wait for the next cycle, or..." She paused, looking guilty. "Or you could take my place. Push me into one of the insane dimensions and escape using the energy from my suffering." I stared at her, horrified. "I can't do that. Then you'll be here for weeks, like I was. And eventually, if you survive long enough, you'll face the same choice." The aurora went completely dark. For maybe 30 seconds, the entire sky was black, except for stars. My companion ran toward the path down the mountain. I saw her figure disappear into the darkness, and I felt a strange pulling sensation, like reality was trying to suck me somewhere else. But I stayed put. I couldn't sacrifice another version of myself, even to escape. When the aurora flared back to life a minute later, my companion was gone, but in her place, I saw a new version of myself, setting up camp. one who looked confused and frightened, like she'd just arrived. Over the following hours, I watched this cycle repeat. Different versions of myself would escape during blackouts, but new ones would appear to replace them. The mountain, or whatever force controlled this place, always maintained its collection of trapped Mariahs. I realized the terrible truth. There was no real escape. Every version of me who left just created space for another version to be trapped. We were all part of some cosmic horror that fed on our suffering and isolation. I've been here for 3 weeks now, by my count. I've learned to avoid the insane versions of myself, the ones who've been here so long they've forgotten their humanity. I've tried to help newer versions understand what's happening, like that older version helped me, but I can feel myself changing. The constant aurora exposure, the isolation, the knowledge that I'm trapped in an infinite loop, it's wearing down my sanity. My recent journal entries are becoming more erratic. I catch myself talking to versions of myself that aren't there. Yesterday, I found myself considering what my companion had suggested, looking at a newly arrived version of myself and thinking how easy it would be to push her into one of the dangerous dimensions during the next blackout. Let her suffer so I could escape. The fact that I'm even thinking about it scares me more than anything else that's happened here. I've managed to jury-rig my equipment to send out this recording during brief moments when the dimensional barriers are thin. If you're receiving this, stay away from Mount McKinley during aurora season. The electromagnetic fields up here don't just create pretty lights, they create traps for human consciousness. I've documented 47 other people who've gone missing in this area during major aurora displays over the past decade. All of them were probably astronomers, photographers, or researchers like me. All of them drawn here by the promise of witnessing something beautiful. We're all still here, scattered across different dimensional layers, slowly going insane from isolation and the knowledge that our only escape requires destroying another version of ourselves. If you must come here, if the aurora calls to you like it called to me, remember this: the mountain always collects its debt. Someone has to pay the price for every person who leaves. And right now, that someone is me. End of transmission. My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I've been working meteorological monitoring stations for 8 years. I started as a weather technician right out of college, got my certification in atmospheric data collection, and worked my way up to senior environmental monitoring specialist. I've handled everything from tornado tracking in Oklahoma to hurricane monitoring in Florida. I've spent countless nights alone in remote weather stations, recording wind speeds and temperature fluctuations that help keep people safe. But what happened during the winter of 2024 at the Chugach Mountain Weather Station in Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about isolation and the human mind. Some things should never be left alone in the dark for too long. I was working night shifts at a hotel in Fairbanks when the job posting came through the National Weather Service database. They needed someone to monitor a remote station during the polar night, that 65-day period when the sun doesn't rise above the horizon. The pay was incredible, triple overtime for the entire duration, plus hazard pay for the isolation. The station sat 300 miles north of Fairbanks, accessible only by helicopter or snowmobile during winter. My job was simple: record temperature readings every 4 hours, monitor wind speed and atmospheric pressure, and transmit daily reports via satellite uplink. The station had everything I needed: food supplies, backup generators, communication equipment, and enough fuel to last the entire polar night period. The helicopter dropped me off on November 18th, just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. The pilot, a gruff guy named Mike, helped me carry my personal gear inside. The station was bigger than I expected: a main monitoring room filled with computers and weather instruments, a small kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a storage room packed with supplies. The walls were thick, built to withstand Arctic storms, and the windows were small but reinforced. Mike showed me the satellite phone for emergencies and the backup radio system. "You sure about this, Rebecca?" he asked, looking around the isolated building. 65 days is a long time to be alone out here. Some people don't handle the darkness well. I laughed and told him I'd be fine. I had my books, my laptop loaded with movies, and enough work to keep me busy. The silence and darkness actually sounded peaceful after years of noisy hotel guests and city traffic. Mike shook his head, wished me luck, and flew back toward civilization. I watched his helicopter lights disappear into the darkness, leaving me completely alone with just the wind and the hum of the monitoring equipment. The first week passed exactly as I expected. I settled into a routine, checking the instruments every 4 hours, recording data, sending reports. The station's motion sensors were designed to detect any large animals or unusual weather phenomena that might affect the equipment. The thermal cameras could spot anything with body heat within a 100-yard radius. Everything worked perfectly. I read 3 books, caught up on shows I'd downloaded, and actually enjoyed the complete silence. No traffic, no people, no distractions. Just me and the endless Arctic night. On day 8, things started getting weird. I was reviewing the daily sensor logs when I noticed something strange. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the perimeter motion sensors had triggered. All 4 of them, in sequence, like something was walking a complete circle around the station. I pulled up the thermal camera footage from that time, but the screens showed nothing except snow and darkness. The motion sensors were top-quality equipment, designed to detect anything larger than a rabbit, but the thermal cameras showed no heat signatures at all. I figured it was probably a technical glitch. Arctic conditions can mess with electronics, even when they're rated for extreme cold. I ran diagnostics on both systems, and everything checked out fine. Maybe it was just wind-blown snow triggering the sensors. I made a note in my log and went back to my routine. Day 12 brought more of the same, except now it happened every single night at exactly 3 a.m. The motion sensors would trigger in that same circular pattern, east-north sensor first, then east, south, and west, like something was methodically walking around the building. I started staying awake to watch the thermal cameras when it happened, but they never showed anything. Just empty snow and darkness. While the motion sensors insisted something was out there, I decided to investigate. I put on my heavy parka, grabbed a portable thermal camera, and went outside during one of these incidents. The cold hit me like a physical wall, 40 below zero with a wind that cut right through my layers. I walked the same path the sensors indicated, scanning with the thermal camera, but found absolutely nothing. No heat signatures, no tracks in the snow, nothing. But as I stood there in the darkness, I could swear I heard footsteps in the snow, matching my own pace. Every time I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. I hurried back inside and checked the portable thermal camera's recorded footage. Nothing. Just me, alone in the snow, with no other heat sources anywhere in the frame, but the audio had picked up what sounded like 2 sets of footsteps crunching through the snow. By day 15, I found the first real evidence that something was wrong. I woke up and went to check the morning readings, but when I looked out my bedroom window, there were footprints in the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Human-sized prints, leading right up to my window, then continuing around the building in that same circular pattern the motion sensors had been detecting. The prints were clear and deep, like someone wearing heavy boots. I grabbed the portable thermal camera and went outside to examine them. The footprints were definitely human, size 10 or 11 boots with a distinctive tread pattern. But when I held the thermal camera over them, they showed no residual heat. Even hours-old human footprints should show some thermal signature in snow this cold, but these showed nothing. It was like they'd been made by something that had no body heat at all. Day 18 changed everything. I was determined to catch whatever was making these prints, so I set up a test. I scattered flour across the floor near the main entrance and positioned a camera to record the area. Then I waited in the monitoring room, watching the live feed. At exactly 3 a.m., the motion sensors triggered their usual sequence. On the camera, I watched in complete disbelief as footprints appeared in the flour. Not tracks being made by visible feet, RAGA, just the impressions themselves materializing in the white powder, one step at a time, walking across my floor while I watched. Something invisible was walking through my station while I was awake and alert, leaving physical evidence of its presence. I recorded everything, checked the footage over and over, but there was no denying what I was seeing. Invisible footprints moving across my floor in a steady, deliberate pace. I tried to rationalize it. I researched polar night psychosis, the documented condition where extreme isolation and darkness cause hallucinations and paranoia. The symptoms matched what I was experiencing. INB. feeling watched, hearing sounds that weren't there, seeing things that couldn't be real. But my equipment was confirming everything. The motion sensors, the cameras, the physical evidence, it was all real, documented, and recorded. Day 25 brought new evidence that nearly broke my sanity. I woke up to find handprints on my frosted bedroom window. 5-fingered human handprints pressed against the glass from the outside, but when I checked with the thermal camera, they showed no heat signature. Later, that day, I watched in the bathroom mirror as my breath fogged the glass, then additional breath patterns appeared beside mine, invisible exhalations from something standing right next to me. I was losing my mind, but I was also collecting undeniable proof that something impossible was happening. On day 28, I felt it for the first time. I was lying in bed when invisible fingers touched my face, gentle but unmistakably real. I could feel the pressure, the texture of skin, but when I turned on the light, nothing was there. The thermal camera beside my bed recorded the entire incident, showing the indentations on my cheek and forehead where something had touched me, but no heat source causing them. I set up motion-activated cameras throughout the entire station. By day 30, the footage showed objects moving by themselves, books sliding across tables, doors opening and closing, equipment being operated by invisible hands. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss as hallucinations. Something was sharing this station with me, something that existed but couldn't be seen. That's when I found the research that explained everything. I discovered scientific papers about polar night sensory deprivation and its effects on human perception. Extended periods of complete darkness don't just cause hallucinations. They can break down the barriers between dimensions. Some people, isolated in polar conditions for long periods, reported becoming partially invisible themselves. Their cellular structure changed, their bodies existing between visible and invisible states. Day 35 brought the first visual confirmation. I started seeing faint outlines of human figures around the station, translucent shapes that became clearer the longer I stared. My mind was adapting to seeing them, like adjusting to darkness, but in reverse. The figures became more solid each day, and I realized they weren't hallucinations. They were other people, trapped, in some kind of invisible state. I tried to communicate with them. They couldn't speak, but they responded to my voice and movements. Through gestures and touching objects, I learned they were other weather station workers, researchers, and isolated workers who had disappeared over the years. Some had been missing for decades, trapped in this invisible existence during their own polar night assignments. Day 40 brought the horrifying truth. These invisible people were desperate to escape their condition, and they had discovered that they could only become visible again by merging with living people. They started trying to communicate through touch, pressing their invisible hands against mine, and I felt their memories and personalities flowing into my mind. They weren't malicious, just terrified and trapped, but their attempts to escape were slowly taking over my consciousness. I began speaking in voices that weren't my own, men and women who had worked these remote stations years before, all pleading for help. My camera recorded me having conversations with myself, answering questions in different voices, recounting memories of lives I'd never lived. I was becoming a gateway for trapped souls, and I could feel my own identity slipping away. By day 45, my body started flickering between visible and invisible states. I would look in the mirror and see myself fading in and out like a bad television signal. The trapped workers were trying to use my body as an anchor to return to the visible world, but instead, they were pulling me into their invisible prison. I knew I had to act before I was lost completely. On day 50, I grabbed one of the emergency flares from the supply room and set fire to the station. As the flames spread, I watched dozens of invisible figures flee the building, their forms briefly visible against the firelight. Some ran toward the mountains, others just dissolved into the darkness. The fire revealed how many people who had been trapped there. Invisible prisoners in a place that existed between realities. I escaped during the chaos, but I wasn't the same. I had become partially invisible myself, existing between the visible and invisible worlds. I could only be seen clearly under direct artificial light, in UI, in darkness or natural light. I flickered like the others. When rescue helicopters arrived 2 days later, the medics could barely see me. Medical tests showed that my cellular structure had changed on a molecular level. I existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, visible only under specific lighting conditions. As the polar night continued, my visibility decreased each day, until I was nearly invisible myself. On day 65, when the sun finally returned to the Arctic, I became fully visible again. But I retained the ability to see the invisible prisoners during periods of darkness. I could see them everywhere, in cities, in remote locations, trapped people who had disappeared during isolated assignments and existed invisibly in the same places where they vanished. I tried to warn the authorities, but they dismissed my reports as severe polar night psychosis. The burned weather station was written off as an equipment malfunction, and I was given medical leave for psychological evaluation. But I knew the truth. Each winter, when the polar night returned, more people got trapped in that invisible dimension. I've documented dozens of missing persons who are actually still alive, existing invisibly in remote locations across Alaska and northern Canada. They're trapped in weather stations, research facilities, and isolated outposts, invisible to the world, but desperate for help. I've made it my mission to help them. Each polar night, I return to guide trapped souls toward the light of civilization, using my ability to exist between worlds as a bridge between the visible and invisible. I've learned to control my visibility, using artificial lights to anchor myself in the visible world while helping others escape their invisible prison. The polar night does more than hide the sun, it hides people, trapping them between realities where they can touch the world but never be seen. And somewhere in the Arctic darkness, they're still walking their endless circles, waiting for someone who can see them to finally bring them home. My name is Tony Reeves, and I've been fixing elevators for 12 years. Started right after high school, working my way up from helper to certified technician here in Anchorage. I've been stuck between floors and broken lifts, crawled through cramped elevator shafts, and rappelled down hundreds of feet to fix cables that snapped under tons of weight. Nothing in those steel boxes ever scared me. But what happened last February in the Wrangell Mountains changed everything I thought I knew about being trapped underground. See, fixing elevators was just my day job. My real passion was exploring abandoned mines for my YouTube channel. I had about 3,000 subscribers who loved watching me squeeze through forgotten tunnels and discover old mining equipment. I thought I knew what being underground meant. I was wrong, dead wrong. Every weekend, I'd load my Jeep with climbing gear and head out to some forgotten mine shaft. Alaska's got thousands of them, gold rush leftovers from the early 1900s. Most are mapped and either sealed or turned into tourist traps. But if you know where to look, you can find the forgotten ones. The ones that don't show up on any modern survey. My gear was professional-grade stuff. Petzl headlamp with 8-hour battery, 200 feet of dynamic climbing rope, backup LED lights, protein bars, water, and my camera setup. I always told someone where I was going and when I'd be back. Safety first. That's what 12 years of elevator work teaches you. February 15th was supposed to be a simple explore. I'd found references to an unmapped shaft in some old mining company records at the state library. The Wrangell Mountains, about 3 hours northeast of town. Weather forecast called for light snow, nothing I couldn't handle. I should have turned back when the light snow became a full blizzard 20 miles from the site. But I'd driven 3 hours already, and my subscribers were expecting new content. The mine entrance was supposed to be behind a stand of spruce trees, marked by an old wooden headframe. Found it right where the records said it would be. The headframe was half-rotted but still standing. The shaft opening was maybe 4 feet across, lined with fitted stones from a century ago. My headlamp beam disappeared into black nothing when I pointed it down. Perfect. I set up my anchor points on 2 solid spruce trees, checked my gear twice, and started filming. What's up, mine explorers? Tony here, and today we're checking out a completely unmapped shaft in the Wrangells. Weather's getting nasty up here, so this'll be quick. Let's see what secrets are hiding 400 feet down. The rappel started smooth. My Petzl device controlled the descent perfectly, just like it had hundreds of times before. The stone walls were amazingly preserved. You could still see chisel marks where miners had carved their way down over a century ago. At 200 feet, my headlamp picked up something carved into the wall. Initials, JM 1923. Then more names. TK 1923. SR. 1923. A dozen different sets of initials, all from the same year. At 350 feet, the walls changed from fitted stone to natural rock. The shaft kept going down into darkness. My rope was rated for 400 feet, so I had maybe 50 feet left when I felt it happen. A sharp crack from above, then another. I looked up and saw the problem. The storm had brought down a tree branch, and it was pressing against my rope where it ran over the edge of the shaft. The rope was starting to fray against the rough stone. "Okay, that's not good," I said to my camera. "Gonna cut this short and head back up." I reached for my ascenders to start climbing back up. That's when the rope snapped. The fall only lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like forever. I hit the bottom of the shaft hard, my camera and gear scattering across the rocky floor. My headlamp went out. Everything went black. When I came to, my backup LED was blinking weakly beside my head. My left shoulder felt like it was on fire, and I tasted blood in my mouth. But I was alive. I sat up slowly and checked my gear. Camera was cracked, but still recording. Most of my food was scattered across the rocks. My rope was gone, hanging uselessly 400 feet above me. I pointed my light up the shaft. The walls were smooth stone, fitted too perfectly for climbing. No way out the way I came down. But my light also revealed something else. About 20 feet away, there was an opening in the shaft wall, a horizontal tunnel leading into the mountain. "Well," I said to my camera, "guess we're taking the scenic route out." The tunnel was maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Old wooden support beams held up the ceiling every few yards. As I crawled through, my light picked up more of those carved initials. Lots more. Hundreds of them, covering both walls. JM, 1923. Day 3. Food running low. TK, 1923. Day 8. Rats all gone. SR, 1923. Day 12. Eating bark and leather now. My blood went cold. These weren't just names and dates. These were journal entries, carved into the wood with knife blades. I kept reading as I crawled. The entries got darker. P. H. 1923. Day 18. Drew lots today. Tommy lost. JM. 1923. Day 19. God forgive us. SR. 1923. Day 23. Only 3 left now. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My light swept across old mining equipment, pickaxes, shovels, oil lanterns from the 1920 seconds. Everything perfectly preserved in the dry underground air. And bones, lots of bones. They were scattered around the chamber like someone had tossed them there after a meal. I'm no expert, but they looked human. Some had teeth marks. Others were cracked open, like someone had been after the marrow inside. I tried to keep my voice steady for the camera. Okay, so it looks like some miners got trapped down here in 1923. Probably a cave-in sealed the entrance. They didn't make it out. That's when I heard the voices. They were faint, echoing from deeper in the tunnel system. 2 people, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded alive. Recent? Hello? I called out. Is someone down here? The voices stopped. Then, after a few seconds, over here. Thank God, someone's here. I followed the voices through another tunnel, this one newer and rougher than the first. My light eventually picked up 2 people huddled around a small chemical light stick. A man and a woman, both in hiking gear. "I'm Brad," the man said, standing up. He was maybe 40, tall and thin with a scraggly beard. "This is Ashley." The woman stayed sitting. She looked younger, maybe mid-20s, with short blonde hair and a haunted look in her eyes. "Tony," I said. "What are you guys doing down here?" "Hiking," Brad said. "Got caught in that storm and fell through what we thought was just snow-covered ground. Turned out to be another entrance to this mine system. That was 8 days ago." 8 days. I looked at Ashley. She was thin, way too thin for someone who'd only been trapped a week. And there was something off about Brad. His eyes were too bright, and when he smiled, his teeth looked weird. Sharp. "Have you found any way out?" I asked. "We've been exploring," Brad said. Lots of tunnels, but they all seemed to loop back on themselves or dead end. Good thing you brought food. He was staring at my scattered protein bars like a starving man. I shared what I had. 3 protein bars and a water bottle. It wasn't much for 3 people, but it was better than nothing. Ashley ate hers so fast she almost choked. Brad ate his slowly, savoring every bite. "How long you think we'll be stuck?" Ashley asked. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming. "I don't know," I said. "I told my buddy I'd be back by Sunday. When I don't show up, he'll call search and rescue." Brad laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Search and rescue? Yeah, they'll never find us down here. This place has been eating people for over 100 years. "What do you mean?" I asked. Instead of answering, Brad led me deeper into the chamber. His flashlight, a heavy maglite that looked like it had seen better days, illuminated more bones. But these weren't from the 1,920 seconds. Some still had scraps of modern clothing attached. "We found these on day 2, Brad said. "Check the dates on some of those newer carvings." I looked where he pointed. Mixed in with the 1923 entries were newer ones. Sarah T., 1,987. Fell through snow. No way out. Mike and Jenny, 1,995. Cave-in behind us. If anyone finds this. David Chen, 2003. Alone for 6 days. Think I hear something in the tunnels. The most recent one made my stomach drop. Lucas Brady, 2019. Rope broke. God, I can hear them eating in the next chamber. "This mine," Brad said, "it's like a trap. The geology's unstable. Entrances collapse and seal themselves every few years, but new ones open up. It catches people regular like, has been for decades." Ashley was crying quietly. "Show him the other thing, Brad." Brad's smile got wider, showing those sharp teeth again. "Ashley, here's been real helpful, haven't you, sweetheart?" That's when I saw her arm. Above the elbow, there were bite marks, fresh ones. Human teeth marks. "What the hell?" I stepped back. "She's been letting me test her," Brad said conversationally. "You know, to see how she'd taste when we get really hungry. Which should be pretty soon, now that our food's all gone again." Ashley looked at me with desperate eyes. "He's been down here longer than 8 days, she whispered. "I found more of his carvings. Brad's been here for months." Brad tilted his head, studying me like I was a piece of meat. "You're bigger than Ashley. Probably tastes better too. More muscle." I backed toward the tunnel entrance. But Brad moved fast. Faster than someone who'd been starving should be able to move. He blocked my path with that heavy maglite raised like a club. "Where are you going, Tony? We're all friends here, all trapped together." "You're insane," I said. "No," Brad said, "just hungry. This mine, it makes you understand what's really important, what you gotta do to survive. The miners in 23 figured it out. So did the others. Now it's our turn." He swung the maglite at my head. I ducked and rolled, grabbing my camera bag. Inside was my backup light and something I'd forgotten about, an old multi-tool my grandfather had given me. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. "Ashley, run!" I yelled, but she was too weak. Brad caught her before she made it to the tunnel. The sounds she made still wake me up at night. I ran deeper into the mine system, Brad's footsteps echoing behind me. My light caught more chambers, more tunnels, more bones. This place was like a maze designed to trap people, and somewhere in that maze was a cannibal who'd been down here long enough to go completely crazy. I found myself in a chamber full of old mining equipment. Pickaxes, shovels, and something that made my heart race, sticks of dynamite, old ones, probably from the original mining operation. The fuses looked dry-rotted, but the explosives might still be good. Brad's voice echoed from somewhere behind me. "Tony, don't make this harder than it has to be. Ashley's already gone quiet, real peaceful like. Your turn now." I grabbed 3 sticks of dynamite and what looked like a working fuse. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work, but I managed to rig up a crude trap near the chamber entrance. When Brad appeared, following my light, I lit the fuse. "You crazy bastard," he screamed, diving for cover. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Rock dust filled the air, and half the tunnel ceiling came down between me and Brad. I could hear him on the other side, digging at the rocks and cursing. I found Ashley in the next chamber over, She was still breathing, but barely. The bite wounds on her arms had gotten infected, and she was burning up with fever. "Tony?" she whispered when she saw my light. "Yeah, it's me. We're getting out of here." She grabbed my wrist with what little strength she had left. He's not human anymore. Been down here too long. Eating people. It changed him. How long has he really been here?" "Found his carvings. From 2018. 5 years, Tony. 5 years of eating anyone who falls down here." She coughed, and blood came up. Don't let him do that to you." Ashley died about an hour later. I stayed with her until the end, then did what I had to do. I used her body to distract Brad when he finally dug through the rockfall. While he was busy, I explored the far end of the chamber system. That's where I found it, a narrow crack in the ceiling that angled upward. It was barely wide enough for a person, but my light showed it going up for a long way, maybe all the way to the surface. The climb was the worst thing I've ever experienced. The crack was so narrow I had to take off my clothes to fit through. The rock was sharp and freezing cold. It was like being born again through a birth canal made of broken glass. I lost track of time in that chimney. Could have been 6 hours, could have been 12. My hands and knees were bleeding from the rough rock. The cold was so intense I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. But eventually, I saw something that wasn't my flashlight beam. Natural light, filtering down from above. I squeezed through the final few feet and emerged onto a snow-covered mountainside. It was still storming, and I was naked in 20 below weather. But I was out. A trucker found me collapsed on the highway 2 miles from where I came out of the mountain. I was blue from hypothermia and barely conscious. Lost 4 toes and 3 fingers to frostbite, but I lived. I told the police everything. About Brad, about Ashley, about the bones and the centuries of people who'd been trapped in that mine. They sent search and rescue teams, but by the time they got there, the entrance I'd used was gone. Another rockfall had sealed it off. The entrance where I'd originally rappelled down, also gone. The storm had brought down half the mountainside, burying the old headframe under tons of rock and snow. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed there was a massive cave system under that mountain. But every attempt to find a way in failed. The geology was too unstable. Any disturbance just caused more rockfalls. The state police investigation turned up 23 missing persons cases over the past 80 years, all in that same area. All people who'd gone hiking or exploring and never came back. The mine had been feeding for decades. I don't do elevator work anymore. Can't handle being in enclosed spaces. These days, I monitor missing person reports for Alaska and the surrounding states. Whenever someone disappears near the Wrangell Mountains, I know the mine has claimed another victim. Sometimes I think about Brad, still down there in the dark, still hungry, still waiting for the next person to fall through the snow into his underground hunting ground. The mine's still there, under all that rock, still hungry, still waiting, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. My name is Danny Rodriguez, and I've been delivering pizzas around Anchorage for about 6 years now. I know every street in this city like the back of my hand. I've dealt with drunk college kids, angry customers, and even had my car broken into twice, but none of that prepared me for what I'd face when I took a second job as a hunting guide in the Chugach Mountains. I started guiding tourists because pizza delivery wasn't paying enough. My rent kept going up, and I needed extra cash. A friend told me about this outfit that needed guides for weekend hunting trips. They said all I needed was basic outdoor knowledge and a clean driving record. Easy money, right? I grew up camping with my grandfather before he disappeared on a hunting trip 30 years ago. I figured I knew enough about the wilderness to keep some city folks safe for a couple days. The company gave me a 2-day training course and a laminated sheet of emergency procedures. They handed me a GPS unit, a satellite phone for emergencies, and a basic first aid kit. My supervisor, Jim, was this old guy who'd been guiding for 20 years. He told me the tourists usually just wanted to see some wildlife and take pictures. Most never even fired their rifles. Just keep them safe and happy, Jim said. Follow the marked trails, set up camp at the designated spots, and radio in every evening at 6. Easy as pie. My first group was a family from Texas, Mark, his wife Sarah, and their teenage son Kyle. They wanted to see real Alaska and maybe bag a moose if they got lucky. Mark had spent thousands on fancy hunting gear but had never been north of Oklahoma. Sarah kept taking selfies with every tree we passed. Kyle wouldn't put down his phone, even though we had no signal up there. We drove out to the trailhead early Friday morning in my beat-up Ford pickup. The plan was simple: hike 3 miles to base camp, set up tents, then spend Saturday looking for game. Sunday, we'd hike back out. I'd done this route twice during training. Nothing to it. But on day 2, everything started going wrong. We were maybe 2 hours into our morning hike when Kyle spotted something weird. "Hey, look at these tracks," he called out, pointing to the muddy ground near a small creek. I walked over expecting to see deer prints or maybe a bear paw. Instead, I found footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were huge, about 18 inches long and shaped like human feet, but way too big. The prints showed 5 toes, but each toe ended in what looked like razor-sharp claw marks that had torn deep grooves in the mud. "It's probably just a bear that reared up on its hind legs," I told them, though I wasn't really convinced. I'd seen bear tracks before, and these were different. Bears have rounded paws with short claws. These looked almost human, except for the size and those wicked claws. Mark was getting excited, thinking we'd found our trophy animal. "How big would a bear have to be to make prints like that?" he asked, kneeling down to take pictures. I measured the prints with my hand. They were nearly twice as long as my boot. "Pretty big," I admitted. "Maybe 800–900 pounds. Sarah didn't like the sound of that. "Are we safe out here? Should we go back?" I reassured her that bears usually avoid people, and we had bear spray if needed. But privately, I was starting to feel uneasy. These tracks were fresh, maybe a few hours old at most, and they seemed to be following the same trail we were on. That night at camp, things got worse. I was just drifting off to sleep around 11 when I heard something moving in the woods around us. It sounded like heavy breathing, but deeper and more guttural than any animal I knew. The sound would circle our camp, maybe 50 feet out in the trees, stopping every few minutes like whatever was making it was studying us. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent. "Hello?" I called out, sweeping the beam across the tree line. "Anyone out there?" The breathing stopped immediately, but I could see the trees swaying and rustling, even though there was no wind that night. It was like something massive was moving through the forest, pushing branches aside as it went. I kept the light on for another 10 minutes, but saw nothing except dark trees and shadows. Eventually, the sounds faded away, and I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up Saturday morning, our food cache was destroyed. We'd hung our supplies in a metal bear container, about 12 feet up a tree, following proper wilderness protocol. That container was military-grade aluminum, designed to withstand a grizzly attack, but whatever had gotten into it had torn the metal apart like it was tissue paper. Long claw marks had shredded the sides of the container. Our canned food was scattered everywhere, some cans completely crushed by what must have been incredible force. Even our backup water bottles were punctured and drained. "Jesus Christ," Mark whispered, staring at the destruction. "What the hell did this?" I found tufts of black hair caught on nearby branches where the creature had climbed the tree. The hair was coarse like a bear's, but much thicker than anything I'd ever seen. Each strand was almost like wire. I tried to stay calm for the family's sake. "It's just a really big bear," I said, though I was starting to doubt that myself. "We'll be more careful tonight." But Kyle had been studying the area around the destroyed cache. "Dad, look at this," he said, pointing to the ground. There were more of those massive footprints, and they led directly away from our camp toward the trail we'd planned to hike that day. It was like the creature had deliberately followed us here and was now waiting somewhere ahead. Sarah wanted to call for pickup immediately, but our satellite phone wasn't getting a signal. The GPS was acting up too, showing our location as somewhere completely different from where we actually were. I tried adjusting the antenna and checking the batteries, but nothing worked. "We'll hike back to the truck," I decided. "It's only 3 miles. But as we packed up camp, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were fresh prints all around our tents, prints we hadn't seen the night before. Whatever had been breathing in the woods had come right up to where we were sleeping, circling us over and over again. The prints showed that it had stood next to each tent for several minutes, just watching us sleep. We started hiking back around noon, moving as fast as we could with full packs. I kept checking behind us, and every time I looked, there were new prints following our trail. The creature was tracking us, staying maybe a quarter-mile back but keeping pace perfectly. Mark was trying to stay brave for his family, but I could see he was scared. "How fast can bears run?" he asked me quietly. "Faster than us," I admitted. "But they usually don't pursue people this way. This isn't normal bear behavior." Kyle was the first to spot it. We'd stopped for a water break when he grabbed my arm and pointed into the trees. "There," he whispered. "Do you see it?" About 100 yards away, standing perfectly still between two large spruces, was a massive shadow. It looked like a person, but way too tall and wide. I estimated it was at least 9 feet high, with arms that hung down past its knees. I raised my binoculars and tried to get a better look, but the thing moved deeper into the forest before I could focus on it. All I caught was a glimpse of something dark and hairy disappearing behind the trees. "It's following us," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It's been following us this whole time." I tried to radio for help on every frequency, but got nothing but static. Our GPS was completely dead now, showing error messages I'd never seen before. Even my compass was spinning wildly, like something was interfering with the magnetic field. We picked up the pace, practically jogging down the trail. But every few minutes, one of us would spot movement in the trees. Always at the edge of our vision, always too far away to see clearly. Then, around 4 in the afternoon, it happened. We were crossing a small clearing when I heard wood snapping behind us. I turned around and saw trees literally being pushed aside as something huge forced its way through the forest. Whatever was making that noise had to weigh at least 800 pounds, maybe more. "Run," I told them. "Run now." We sprinted across the clearing and back into the tree line on the other side. Behind us, the crashing sounds got louder and closer. I could hear heavy footsteps now, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. We reached a rocky outcrop where we could take cover and catch our breath. Mark had his rifle out, hands shaking as he tried to load it. "What do you see back there?" he asked. I peered around the rocks toward the clearing we'd just crossed. At first, I saw nothing. Then something moved near the tree line. It stepped out into the open, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had been hunting us. It was definitely not a bear. The creature stood upright like a human, but was massive, probably 9 feet tall and built like a gorilla, but even broader across the shoulders. Its arms were incredibly long, reaching almost to its knees, and ended in hands with fingers like thick tree branches. The whole body was covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the afternoon light. But the face was the worst part. It looked like someone had tried to mix a human and an ape, creating something that shouldn't exist. The eyes were too intelligent, too focused. It wasn't just an animal, it was studying us, planning something. When it saw me watching, the creature opened its mouth and let out a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't quite a roar or a howl, but something in between, a deep, ear-splitting call that echoed off the mountains around us. And from different directions in the forest, other voices answered. There were more of them out there. Maybe 4 or 5, all calling back and forth like they were coordinating something. We were surrounded. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." I fired 3 shots in the air, hoping to scare them off. The sound stopped immediately, but I could feel them out there, watching us from the trees. We spent the worst night of my life, huddled together behind those rocks. The creatures never attacked directly, but they kept us awake all night. They would throw rocks, huge boulders that no normal animal could lift, hitting the ground around us with perfect accuracy. Every hour or so, one of them would let out that horrible howl, and the others would answer from different positions. They were playing with us. When dawn finally came, we found our campsite from the night before completely destroyed. Everything we'd left behind was torn apart or bent into twisted shapes. Even our metal tent stakes were snapped in half. But that wasn't the worst discovery. While we waited for a rescue helicopter I'd finally managed to call on the satellite phone, I decided to explore a cave system we'd spotted nearby. I thought maybe I could find some clue about what these creatures were. What I found inside that cave changed everything. The walls were covered with scratch marks, deep gouges carved into solid rock by something with incredible strength. But in the deepest part of the cave, I found something that made me understand we'd been in much more danger than I'd realized. Human skulls, dozens of them, arranged in careful patterns like some kind of shrine. Some of the skulls showed crushing damage from massive jaws. Others had claw marks scraped across the prop, bone. A few still had bits of fabric or metal attached, pieces of clothing and equipment from people who disappeared in these mountains over the years. And then I found something that made my heart stop. Among the collection was a set of military dog tags, green with age but still readable. The name stamped on them was Rodriguez Miguel, my grandfather's name. My grandfather had disappeared on a hunting trip in these exact mountains 30 years ago. Search teams never found a trace of him. Now I knew why. These creatures had been collecting trophies from hunters and hikers for decades, maybe longer. They specifically targeted experienced outdoorsmen, people who thought they knew how to survive in the wilderness. The helicopter arrived just as I was making my way back to the others. But as the pilot was preparing to land, the creatures decided to make their final play. 6 of them emerged from the forest at once, moving with coordinated precision. Each one was massive, at least 8 feet tall, with the same elongated arms and intelligent, predatory faces I'd seen before. They started hurling boulders at the helicopter with incredible accuracy. The pilot had to bank hard to avoid a rock the size of a washing machine that would have taken out his rotor blades. One of the creatures actually leaped toward the aircraft as it hovered, jumping at least 15 feet into the air, trying to grab the landing skid. The pilot pulled up just in time, and we barely escaped. When I reported what happened to the park authorities, they dismissed my story as a bear encounter gone wrong. Traumatic experiences can make people see things that aren't there, the ranger told me with a patronizing smile. But within a month, 3 more hunting parties reported similar encounters in the Chugach Mountains. Each story was the same: massive humanoid creatures, coordinated hunting behavior, and evidence of intelligence far beyond any known animal. When I told my grandmother about finding my grandfather's dog tags, she put me in touch with some native Alaskan elders. They listened to my story without surprise. "You met the Kushtaka's brothers," one old man told me, "ancient ones who collect the souls of hunters in the mountains. Your grandfather was taken by them, and now you've seen why." I quit the guiding job immediately. I'm back to delivering pizzas full-time now, and I plan to stay that way. The mountains can keep their secrets. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving the empty streets of Anchorage, I'll catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows between buildings. Something too tall, too broad, watching me from the darkness. I think they remember me, and I think they're waiting for me to come back to their territory. I won't be returning to the Chugach Mountains anytime soon. Some hunting trips aren't worth the risk, no matter how much they pay. My name is Mike Torres, and I've been hunting elk in Alaska for 8 years. I work at Peterson's Auto Parts here in Anchorage, but every October, I take my vacation time to head up to the Talkeetna Mountains for hunting season. I've got my hunting license, completed my safety courses, and I know these mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I've tracked elk through thick forest, camped alone for weeks, and never had any problems. But what happened last October, near Troublesome Creek, changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in those mountains. Some things up there aren't what they appear to be. October 15th was opening day of elk season. I'd been planning this trip for months, studying maps, checking weather reports, and making sure all my gear was ready. The forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the 30s at night, 50s during the day. I loaded up my Ford F-150 with everything I needed: my .30-06 rifle, camping gear, enough food for 5 days, and my GPS unit. I'd hunted this area before, about 20 miles north of Talkeetna, where Troublesome Creek runs through a valley known for big elk herds. The drive took 3 hours on progressively smaller roads until I was on a dirt logging road that barely fit my truck. I found my usual spot around 4 p.m., a small clearing next to the creek, sheltered by thick spruce trees. Perfect for a base camp. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and prepared for an early morning hunt. The area felt exactly like it always had. Quiet, peaceful, with fresh elk sign everywhere. I could see tracks in the mud near the creek, big prints that told me there were mature bulls in the area. That first evening, I sat by my campfire, cleaning my rifle and going over my hunting plan. I'd wake up before dawn, follow the creek upstream for about a mile, then cut east into the thick timber where I'd seen elk before. The weather was holding perfect, no wind to carry my scent, and the moon would give me enough light to move through the forest safely. I went to bed feeling confident about my chances. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of my alarm. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. I figured that was normal for hunting season when there's more human activity in the woods. I made coffee on my camp stove, ate a quick breakfast, and headed out with my rifle and day pack. The temperature was right around freezing, and my breath made clouds in the beam of my headlamp. About a quarter mile from camp, I found them, fresh elk tracks in a muddy patch near the creek. These weren't from yesterday. The edges were sharp and clean, probably made just a few hours earlier. They were heading upstream, deeper into the mountains. Perfect. I turned off my headlamp as the sky started getting lighter and began following the trail. For the next 3 hours, I tracked those prints through increasingly thick forest. The elk had been moving steadily, not running, just walking at a normal pace. Every few hundred yards, I'd find fresh sign, broken branches, disturbed leaves, more tracks in soft ground. Whoever made these tracks was big, probably a mature bull based on the size of the hoofprints. Then, around 9 a.m., the tracks just stopped. I was standing in a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, looking down at the last clear hoofprint in the mud. Beyond that, nothing. I circled the entire clearing twice, looking for where the elk might have gone. There were no more tracks leading out of the clearing in any direction. It was like the animal had just vanished into thin air. That's when I noticed something else. Right where the elk tracks ended, there was a different set of prints in the mud. Human footprints. Barefoot human footprints. I knelt down to get a better look. They were definitely human. I could see the outline of toes, the arch of the foot, even what looked like the impression of toenails. But who the hell would be walking around barefoot in freezing October weather? The prints were fresh, just like the elk tracks had been. And they were heading back toward my camp. A cold feeling started growing in my stomach. I stood up and looked around the clearing again. Something was very wrong here. Elk don't just disappear, and people don't walk around barefoot in near-freezing weather. I checked my GPS. I was about 3 miles from camp, deeper in the mountains than I'd ever been before. I decided to follow the barefoot tracks back toward camp. Maybe I'd run into whoever was out here and get some answers. The tracks were easy to follow. The person had stepped in every muddy spot, like they were deliberately leaving a trail. But as I followed them, I noticed they weren't taking the most direct route back to camp. They were wandering, circling around trees, sometimes doubling back on themselves. It took me 2 hours to follow the tracks back to my campsite, and what I found there made my blood run cold. The barefoot prints circled my entire camp. Not once, but multiple times. There were prints by my tent, around my fire pit, near my truck. Someone had been walking around my campsite for what must have been hours while I was sleeping. I checked my truck first. Nothing missing, no damage. My gear was exactly where I'd left it. But the idea that someone had been walking around my camp all night while I was defenseless in my tent made me feel sick. I grabbed my rifle and did a complete check of the area, but there was no sign of whoever had been there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another hunter who'd gotten lost and stumbled onto my camp during the night. Maybe they were disoriented, and that's why they were barefoot. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't make sense. No lost hunter would circle a campsite multiple times and then just leave. I spent the rest of that day closer to camp, trying to hunt the area within a mile radius. But I couldn't concentrate. Every sound made me look over my shoulder. Every shadow looked like it might be moving. I kept thinking about those barefoot tracks and how they'd appeared exactly where the elk tracks had disappeared. That evening, I built my fire bigger than usual and kept my rifle within reach. I tried to eat dinner, but I wasn't hungry. The forest around me felt different now, like I was being watched. Every time a branch creaked in the wind, I'd look up expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the firelight. Around 10 p.m., I was getting ready to turn in when I saw movement at the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the forest. There, standing maybe 50 yards away, was a man. He was completely naked, standing perfectly still between 2 spruce trees. Even at that distance, I could tell something was off about him. His proportions looked wrong somehow. His arms seemed too long for his body, and his torso was too wide. But what really got to me was how still he was. No one stands that motionless in freezing weather. "Hey!" I called out. "You okay out there?" The man turned and ran into the forest. But it wasn't a normal run. It was too fast, too fluid, like he was moving on all fours, even though I could swear he was upright. I grabbed my rifle and my flashlight and followed him into the trees. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush ahead of me, but I couldn't see him. After about 100 yards, the sound stopped. I swept my flashlight back and forth, but there was nothing. Then I looked down at the ground. Fresh elk tracks, big ones, heading deeper into the forest. I followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards before the reality of what I was seeing hit me. These tracks were identical to the ones I'd followed that morning. Exactly the same size, exactly the same stride length. But that was impossible. The naked man I'd seen couldn't have been an elk. Could he? I stood there in the dark forest, my flashlight beam shaking as my hands trembled. Nothing about this made sense. People don't turn into elk. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen, the naked man running into the forest, and elk tracks where his footprints should have been. I went back to camp and sat by my fire, trying to think rationally about what was happening. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the stress of hunting alone was getting to me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I woke up to find my firewood neatly stacked next to my fire pit. Not scattered like I'd left it, but carefully arranged in a perfect pile. And the fire itself was still burning, even though it should have died out hours ago. I looked around the campsite and found tracks everywhere. Most were elk tracks, but some showed the animal walking on just its hind legs, like a person. The tracks went right up to my fire pit, where there were impressions in the dirt that looked like something had been sitting. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me years ago. He was part Yupik, and he used to tell stories about things called kushtaka, shapeshifters that could take any animal form. He said they lived in the deep wilderness and sometimes helped lost hunters, but they always wanted something in return. I spent that day researching on my phone, using what little cell signal I could get. The stories I found online were all similar. Ancient Alaskan legends about entities that could transform into any animal they'd consumed. They were supposed to be protectors of the wilderness, but they were also dangerous. Some stories said they would help hunters, but only if the hunter agreed to let them take their form. As I read, I started noticing other things around my camp. Bear tracks that came within 20 yards of my tent and then suddenly turned away, like something had scared off the bear. Scratch marks on trees that were too high and too deep to be from any normal animal. And, everywhere, those elk tracks that sometimes showed the animal walking upright. That evening, I decided to try something. I'd read that tobacco was considered a sacred offering in many native traditions. I didn't smoke, but I had some chewing tobacco in my truck. I left a small pile of it next to my fire pit before going to bed. I woke up the next morning to find the tobacco gone and a fresh elk quarter hanging from a tree branch near my camp. The meat was clean, professionally butchered, and still warm. There was no way a normal elk had been killed and processed that quickly. I knew I should pack up and leave right then, but I was fascinated. Whatever was out there had been protecting me and was now providing food. I cooked some of the elk meat for breakfast, and it was the best I'd ever tasted. Over the next 2 days, I started seeing the creature more often. It would appear as different animals, sometimes an elk, sometimes a wolf, sometimes that naked human form. But the eyes were always the same, intelligent and aware in a way that no animal's eyes should be. On my last night, I was sitting by my fire when an elk walked into my campsite. But this elk was walking on its hind legs, like a person. It sat down across from my fire and held out its front hooves toward the flames, warming them like hands. The elk looked directly at me and nodded, like it was acknowledging our partnership. Then it spoke, not with words but directly into my mind. "You understand now, we help each other. But I need your form to help others like you." That's when I realized what it wanted. The creature could take any animal form, but to take human form, it needed to consume a human first. It had been studying me, learning how to copy my appearance, and now it wanted me to agree to let it take my life so it could help other hunters by appearing as me. I looked into those intelligent elk eyes and saw versions of myself reflected there. The creature had been practicing, creating imperfect copies of my face and body. It was getting better each time. "No," I said out loud, "I won't let you take my form." The elk's expression changed. The intelligence in its eyes turned cold, predatory. It stood up on its hind legs and walked back into the forest. But I could feel its anger, its disappointment that I'd broken our partnership. I packed up my camp that night and tried to start my truck. Nothing. The engine wouldn't even turn over. I popped the hood and found that several wires had been chewed through, but not by any animal I knew. The cuts were too precise, too purposeful. I grabbed my pack and started hiking toward the main road. It was 15 miles through rough country, but I didn't have a choice. As I walked, I could hear animals moving parallel to my path. Sometimes I'd see them, an elk watching me from a ridge, a wolf keeping pace through the trees, and always that naked human form appearing and disappearing at the edge of my vision. It took me 2 days to reach the ranger station at the park entrance. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and probably hypothermic. The rangers took me to the hospital and then organized a search party to find my truck and investigate my story. They found my campsite exactly as I'd described, but there was no evidence of any unusual animal activity. No strange tracks, no signs of elk walking upright, nothing. The rangers figured I'd gotten spooked by normal wildlife and let my imagination run wild. But 6 months later, I started hearing stories from other hunters in the area. They talked about meeting a helpful guy named Mike Torres, who would appear when they were lost or in trouble. This Mike would help them find their way back to safety and then disappear into the forest. The thing is, I haven't been back to Talkeetna since that October, and I never told anyone my last name when I met other hunters up there. But somehow, that creature learned it. It's still up there, wearing my face, using my name, and I have no idea what it really wants from the people it helps. I still work at the auto parts store. I still love hunting, but I'll never go back to the Talkeetna Mountains, because somewhere up there, something is walking around looking exactly like me, and I don't think its intentions are as helpful as it pretends them to be. My name is Robert Kim, and I've been driving trucks on Alaska's ice roads for 8 years. Most people think truck driving is just about moving from point A to point B, but ice road trucking is a whole different beast. You're hauling 80,000 pounds of cargo across frozen rivers and lakes where the ice is sometimes only 3 feet thick. One wrong move, one patch of weak ice, and you're looking at a 40-foot drop into freezing water with no chance of rescue. I specialize in the Dalton Highway Run, a 400-mile stretch from Fairbanks up to the Arctic oil fields. It's one of the most dangerous roads in North America. Temperatures drop to minus 60 degrees. Your truck can break down and you'll freeze to death before help arrives. I've seen guys lose fingers to frostbite just changing a tire. But I know every mile of that road, every curve, every steep grade, every spot where the wind hits hardest. I've driven it over 200 times, through blizzards that would shut down entire cities. My dispatcher calls me when other drivers won't take the run. That kind of reputation takes years to build, and it pays well enough to support my family back in Anchorage. What happened 3 weeks ago, on my latest run, changed everything I thought I knew about that road, and about what kinds of things can be waiting for you out there in the Arctic wilderness. It was February 15th, and I was running a load of drilling equipment to the Prudhoe Bay oil complex. The weather forecast showed clear skies and minus 40 degrees, have ice, perfect conditions for ice road driving, cold enough to keep the ice solid, but no snow or wind to mess with visibility. I left Fairbanks at 4 a.m. in my Peterbilt 379, a truck I'd been driving for 3 years. She had a 550 horsepower Caterpillar engine and every cold weather modification you could think of. Engine block heater, transmission warmer, auxiliary power unit to keep the cab heated during mandatory rest stops. The company had invested over $200,000 in that truck because Arctic breakdowns cost more than the equipment. The first 200 miles went exactly like always. I passed through the small towns along the highway, stopped at the usual truck stops for fuel and safety checks. My CB radio crackled with chatter from other drivers making the same run. The satellite GPS showed me making good time, right on schedule for a 14-hour delivery window. Everything was routine until I hit mile 200. About halfway through the journey, that's where the road gets really isolated, nothing but frozen wilderness for the next 100 miles. The nearest help is either way behind you or way ahead. I was coming around a long curve when I saw someone standing by the roadside, waving their arms. In 8 years of driving this route, I'd maybe seen 5 stranded motorists. Most people smart enough to drive the Dalton Highway are smart enough to not get stranded, but you never leave someone out there to freeze to death. I downshifted and hit the air brakes, feeling the truck slow carefully on the icy surface. As I got closer, I could see it was a man in a thick winter coat, jumping up and down to stay warm. When I finally stopped and got a good look at him through my passenger window, my blood went cold. The man looked exactly like my younger brother Tommy. Same face, same build, same way of standing with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Even the same nervous smile Tommy had been giving me since we were kids. The resemblance was so perfect it made me dizzy. But Tommy lived in Seattle. He worked as an accountant for a software company. He'd never been to Alaska in his life, and he definitely wasn't the type to go camping in the Arctic wilderness. I rolled down my passenger window, and the man jogged over. "Thank God you stopped," he said, and even his voice sounded like Tommy's. "My car broke down about 2 miles back. I've been walking for an hour." I stared at him, trying to process what I was seeing. "What's your name?" I asked. "Tommy Kim," he said without hesitation. "And you're Robert, right? I can tell by the truck. You always said you wanted to drive the big rigs." That hit me like a punch to the stomach. Tommy was the only person who knew I'd dreamed about truck driving since I was 12 years old. Before our parents pushed me toward college, before I eventually came back to trucking anyway. "Get in," I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to drive away. "You'll freeze to death out there." The man climbed into my passenger seat, and I cranked up the heat. He rubbed his hands together and looked around the cab with the same curious expression Tommy always had when seeing something new. "This is incredible," he said. "All these gauges and controls. How do you keep track of everything?" I explained the basic systems while I got the truck moving again, but my mind was racing. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of me and Tommy from last Christmas. "Does this look familiar?" He studied the picture and smiled. "Of course, that was at Mom's house. You gave me that stupid fishing lure as a joke present, remember? Said I needed to learn how to catch something besides computer viruses. I nearly drove off the road. That fishing lure joke was something only Tommy and I knew about. Our mom had been in the kitchen during that exchange. No one else heard it. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to call my dispatcher about picking you up. Company policy." What I really wanted was to call Tommy. I grabbed my satellite phone and dialed Tommy's number in Seattle. It rang 3 times, then I heard my brother's voice. "Hey Robert, what's up? Isn't it like 2 a.m. there?" "Tommy?" I said, looking at the man sitting next to me. "Where are you right now?" "At work. Pulling an all-nighter trying to fix this database crash." "Why? You sound weird." I looked at the hitchhiker again. He was staring straight ahead with a small smile, not reacting to my conversation at all. "What did you do yesterday?" I asked Tommy. "Worked, went home, watched Netflix. Same as always. Are you okay?" I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking as I put the phone away. "Everything all right?" the hitchhiker asked, and his voice still sounded exactly like Tommy's. "Yeah," I lied, just checking in. But everything was definitely not all right. I was sitting next to something that looked like my brother, sounded like my brother, and somehow knew things only my brother should know. But my actual brother was 2,000 miles away, fixing computers in Seattle. For the next 50 miles, I tried to act normal while my passenger chatted about family memories. He mentioned our childhood dog, Rex. He talked about the time Tommy broke his arm falling out of our treehouse. He even brought up our father's funeral 5 years ago, and how Tommy had been too upset to give the eulogy. All of it was true. All of it was accurate. But something was wrong with the way he told the stories. It was like he was reading from a script, hitting all the right details, but missing the emotions that should go with them. That's when I started paying attention to other things, like how he never seemed to blink. I watched him for 10 full minutes, and his eyes stayed wide open the entire time. And his breathing, it was too quiet. Even in the warm cab, I should have been able to hear him breathe, but there was nothing. I adjusted my rearview mirror to get a better look at him, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In the mirror, his reflection looked slightly different. The face was still Tommy's, but the proportions were just a little off. The nose was too wide, the eyes too far apart. Like someone had tried to copy a photograph but gotten the measurements slightly wrong. His shadow on the passenger door was wrong too. The silhouette didn't quite match his body position. When he leaned forward, the shadow lagged behind by a split second. When he turned his head, the shadow moved in the opposite direction. "So, Robert," he said, still staring straight ahead, "tell me more about this route. How often do you drive it?" "Couple times a month," I said. "Depends on the oil field schedules." "And it's always the same road? Same stops?" "Pretty much." "Why?" "Just curious. It must get lonely out here. I bet you don't see many other people." There was something hungry in the way he asked that, like he was gathering information for something. I decided to test him. "Remember that time we went camping with Dad at Lake Tahoe?" I said. "You caught that huge bass?" "Oh yeah," he said immediately. "That was a great trip." We'd never been camping at Lake Tahoe. We'd never been camping anywhere, actually. Our dad hated the outdoors. "And remember our pet hamster, Charlie?" I continued. "Of course, poor little guy. We'd never had a hamster." I was making everything up, and he was agreeing with all of it. Whatever was sitting next to me, it could copy Tommy's appearance and voice. It even had access to some of his real memories, but it was just working from a limited script. It didn't actually know my brother. I started planning how to get away from it. At mile 300, I pulled into a truck stop. I had die head, just a fuel station and a small diner where drivers could grab food and rest. There were 3 other trucks parked there, which meant witnesses. I figured whatever this thing was, it wouldn't try anything with other people around. I was wrong. As soon as we walked into the diner, the thing that looked like Tommy turned on the charm. It introduced itself to the other drivers, shook hands, made small talk about the weather and road conditions. To everyone else, it was just a normal guy who'd gotten stranded and caught a ride. "This is my brother Robert," it told them. "He's been acting kind of strange today. I'm a little worried about him." I felt my face go red. "I'm fine," I said. "He keeps asking me weird questions," the fake Tommy continued. "Like he doesn't remember our own family history. And he's been talking to himself while driving." The other drivers looked at me with concern. One of them, an older guy named Bill, who I'd known for years, pulled me aside. "You okay, Robert? You seem pretty wound up." "Bill, that's not my brother," I said. "I know how it sounds, but that thing is pretending to be him." Bill glanced over at fake Tommy, who was laughing at someone's joke and looking completely normal. "Robert, you've been driving alone for too long. Maybe you should call your dispatcher, get someone to finish this run. My brother is in Seattle right now. I just talked to him on the phone. Maybe he flew up here. Maybe it's a surprise visit." I realized how crazy I sounded. This thing had completely turned the situation around, making me look like the problem. While I was trying to convince Bill, I saw fake Tommy talking to the other drivers, memorizing their faces, their mannerisms, the way they moved. That night, I pretended to sleep in my cab while keeping one eye on the diner. Around 2 a.m., I saw fake Tommy come outside. But instead of heading toward my truck, he walked behind the building where the other trucks were parked. I snuck out and followed him, staying low behind a snowbank. What I saw made me understand what I was really dealing with. The thing was standing next to Bill's truck, but it wasn't Tommy anymore. It had changed into Bill, same beard, same belly, same coveralls. It was practicing Bill's walk, his gestures, the way he scratched his chin when thinking. As I watched, it shifted again. This time into Jake, the younger driver who'd left the truck stop around midnight. It copied his swagger, his habit of cracking his knuckles. It was like watching someone try on different clothes, except the clothes were human identities. The thing was building a collection. It could become any of us now. I crept back to my truck and tried to figure out what to do. Running seemed like the best option, but when I climbed into my cab, fake Tommy was already sitting in the passenger seat. "Going somewhere?" it asked with Tommy's voice. "Just checking the tire pressure," I lied. "No, you weren't." Its voice was still Tommy's, but the warmth was gone. "You were watching me. That's not very brotherly." I started the engine, figuring my best bet was to get to the oil field and find help there. At least there would be security guards and other workers. "Where did you come from?" I asked as we drove. "I've always been here," it said. "Waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone like you, someone who drives alone, someone who knows the roads." That's when I understood. This thing needed me. It needed my knowledge of the route, my schedule, my access to isolated travelers. It was learning how to hunt. The final 100 miles to Prudhoe Bay felt like driving through hell. Fake Tommy sat perfectly still, not speaking, just staring ahead with those unblinking eyes. I kept checking the mirrors, hoping to see its reflection glitch again, but now it looked normal. It was getting better at being human. When we finally reached the oil complex, I drove straight to the security checkpoint. There were guards there, workers, people with radios and cameras. I figured there was no way the thing would try anything. "Wait here," I told it and jumped out of the cab. I ran to the security booth and started explaining to the guard about the hitchhiker, about how it wasn't human, about how it could change shapes. The guard listened patiently, then walked over to my truck to check it out. The passenger seat was empty. "Sir, there's nobody in your truck," the guard said. I looked through every window, checked the sleeper berth, even looked under the trailer. The thing had vanished completely. "Maybe your passenger went to use the restroom," the guard suggested. But we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by security fences and industrial equipment. There was nowhere to go, and no restrooms outside the secured area. The guard radioed my company, reporting that I'd arrived but seemed to be having some kind of breakdown. He said I was claiming to have picked up a passenger, but was found talking to an empty truck. My dispatcher ordered me to report to the company medical facility for evaluation before I could drive again. They suspended me, pending a psychological assessment. That's when things got really bad. The doctor who evaluated me was a middle-aged woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. She was professional, understanding, asked all the right questions about stress and isolation and long-distance driving. She seemed genuinely concerned about my mental health. But halfway through the evaluation, I noticed something wrong with her reflection in the window behind her desk. Just like with fake Tommy, the proportions were slightly off. And when she turned to write notes, her shadow moved a split second too late. "How long have you been seeing things that aren't there, Robert?" she asked with Dr. Chen's voice. I bolted from that office and didn't stop running until I was outside the complex. But I had nowhere to go. My truck was impounded, my company thought I was crazy, and the thing could look like anyone now. Over the next few days, it appeared as different people to discredit everything I said. When I tried to warn other truckers, it showed up as my dispatcher to tell them I was mentally unstable. When I called my family, it answered the phone as Tommy, assuring everyone that I'd been acting strange for months. It even appeared as a police officer when I tried to file a report, taking my statement and then filing it as the ravings of someone having a psychotic break. The worst part was realizing that it was still out there, still learning, still collecting identities. And now it had my route, my schedule, my knowledge of where to find isolated travelers. I never went back to ice road trucking. I got a job delivering packages in Anchorage, short routes with lots of stops and witnesses. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I see someone who looks familiar standing by the side of the road, waving for help. And I keep driving, because I know that the thing I picked up on mile 200 is still out there, wearing the faces of people I used to trust, waiting for the next driver who thinks they're just helping a stranded traveler. If you ever find yourself driving alone on an isolated road and see someone who looks exactly like someone you know, someone who shouldn't be there, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because some things are very good at pretending to be human, and they're always hungry for new faces to wear. My name is Jessica Walsh, and for the past 12 years, I've been living two lives. By day, I'm a library assistant at the Anchorage Public Library, helping kids find picture books and organizing genealogy records. But every weekend, every vacation day, every free moment I can steal, I'm underground. I'm a certified cave rescue technician and have explored over 300 cave systems across Alaska. My father died in a mining accident when I was 8, cave-in at the old Copper Creek mine. They never found his body. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to dark places underground. Maybe I'm still looking for him. My mother thinks it's morbid, but there's something about the absolute silence 300 feet below the surface that feels like coming home. The darkness wraps around you like a blanket, and for a few hours, the world above stops existing. I've pulled injured cavers out of impossible spaces, mapped uncharted systems for the Park Service, and spent 72 hours alone in Carlsbad caverns when a storm trapped me inside. I thought I'd seen every kind of underground danger: hypothermia, getting lost, equipment failure, flash floods. But what happened in the Denali Mountains this past March changed everything I thought I knew about what lives beneath Alaska's frozen ground. Some things have been sleeping under our feet for thousands of years, and we should have left them alone. It started with a phone call from Mike Torres, my spelunking group leader. Mike's been exploring Alaskan caves for 23 years and has discovered 14 previously unknown cave systems. When he calls, I listen. "Jess, we've got something special." His voice crackled through my cell phone. "Big earthquake near Denali 3 weeks ago, 6.4 magnitude, opened up cave entrances that weren't there before. Park Service wants experienced teams to do preliminary surveys before they send in their geology crews." I was already checking my work schedule before he finished talking. "When do we go?" "This weekend. Just the core team. You, me, Sarah, and that new guy Tommy." Sarah Chen is our geology expert, 28 years old with a PhD from University of Alaska. She can read rock formations like I read library catalogs. Tommy Rodriguez joined our group 6 months ago. Young, eager, maybe a little too fearless for his own good. Good team for technical work. The drive to Denali took us through some of the most beautiful and isolated country in Alaska. Mile after mile of snow-covered peaks, frozen lakes, and forests so thick you can't see 10 feet into them. We stopped for supplies in Healy, the last real town before you hit true wilderness. The locals at the hardware store were friendly, but nervous when we mentioned the earthquake zone. "Been weird sounds coming from up there," said Frank, the store owner. "Animals acting strange too. Caribou came down from the mountains 2 weeks early this season, like something spooked them. We drove the final 30 miles on logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Potholes deep enough to swallow a tire, fallen trees we had to chainsaw out of our path. The earthquake had made things worse, fresh cracks in the asphalt, rock slides blocking sections of road. By the time we reached our trailhead, the sun was already setting behind the peaks. The hike to the cave entrance took 4 hours through terrain that tried to kill us with every step. Melting snow created muddy sinkholes that could trap your leg up to the knee. Creek crossings where the ice looked solid but cracked under your weight, plunging your boots into water so cold it felt like electric shocks. My GPS showed we were 12 miles from the nearest road, 18 miles from cell phone coverage. We found the cave entrance at 11:30 p.m., working by headlamp. A jagged crack in the mountainside, about 5 feet wide at the opening, extending down into absolute darkness. The rock around the entrance was fresh broken, sharp edges that would slice through clothing if you weren't careful. This crack definitely hadn't existed before the earthquake. We set up base camp 200 feet from the entrance and spent Friday night testing our equipment. Digital depth meters, GPS units, climbing gear, emergency radios, backup batteries, first aid supplies. Everything checked out perfectly. The temperature inside the cave mouth was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, our main, normal for this elevation and season. Saturday morning, we began our descent. The first chamber was everything you'd expect from a limestone cave system. Flowstone formations, crystal pools, delicate soda straws hanging from the ceiling like frozen icicles. Our voices echoed off cathedral-high walls covered in mineral deposits that sparkled in our headlamp beams. Beautiful, peaceful, normal. The bat colony should have been our first warning. Thousands of little brown bats clustered on the ceiling, more than I'd ever seen in a single chamber. Bats need multiple exits for air circulation, which meant this cave system went deep and connected to other openings. But these bats were agitated, shifting constantly, chittering in frequencies that made my teeth ache. "They're stressed about something," Sarah observed, adjusting her headlamp to get a better look. "Probably still spooked from the earthquake." We mapped the first level carefully, marking our route with reflective tape every 50 feet. Standard procedure. I'd done this hundreds of times before. We documented rock formations, took water temperature readings, noted airflow patterns. Professional, methodical, boring. But when we reached the second level, approximately 200 feet below the surface, everything changed. "What the hell?" Mike's voice echoed strangely in the tunnel ahead. The limestone formations had given way to something completely different. Instead of natural cave passages carved by water over millions of years, we found tunnels that looked too manufactured. Perfectly circular passages, exactly 7 feet in diameter, extending into the darkness beyond our headlamp range. The walls were worn smooth as glass. "These aren't natural," Sarah said, running her hands along the tunnel surface. Her voice was tight with confusion. "Water doesn't carve passages this precisely round. And look at these marks." The scrape marks were deep gouges in the stone, running parallel along the tunnel walls at shoulder height. 4 parallel grooves, each one 2 inches wide and nearly an inch deep, extending as far as our lights could reach. They looked like claw marks, but impossibly large. I'd seen bear claws marks on trees before. These were 10 times bigger. "What kind of animal has claws this size?" Tommy asked, tracing one of the grooves with his finger. None of us had an answer. Grizzly bears have 4-inch claws, but these marks were from something with 20-inch talons. No known animal in Alaska was that large. We followed the carved tunnel for half a mile before finding the first piece of physical evidence. Caught on a sharp protrusion of rock, fluttering slightly in the cave's air current, was a fragment of shed skin. I pulled it free carefully and held it up to my headlamp. The skin was thick as leather but flexible like rubber, dark brown with an iridescent quality that made it shimmer in the light. Based on the size and curvature, it had come from something at least 12 feet long. Maybe longer. "Snakes don't get this big," Sarah whispered. "Not in Alaska, not anywhere." The skin didn't match any known species. Too thick for any serpent, wrong texture for mammals, completely outside the parameters of anything that should exist in these mountains. As we descended deeper, the tunnel system became more complex. Passages branched off in multiple directions, all with the same perfectly circular cross-section. They intersected at precise angles, creating a 3-dimensional maze that extended in every direction. These weren't random animal burrows. This was engineering. Intentional excavation by something with intelligence and purpose. The mathematical precision was unsettling. Whoever, whatever, had created this network understood structural engineering. Load-bearing supports, drainage angles, air circulation patterns. This was the work of a mind that understood construction principles. At the 500-foot depth marker, following our main survey route, we discovered the feeding chamber. The smell hit us first, a thick, organic stench that made our eyes water. Rotting meat mixed with something acidic and sharp that burned the inside of your nose. Our headlamps illuminated a circular chamber about 30 feet across, and the floor was covered with bones. Not just a few scattered remains. Mountains of bones, femurs as long as baseball bats, skulls the size of basketballs, rib cages you could crawl inside. Bear bones, moose antlers, caribou spines, wolf skulls, the remains of hundreds of surface animals that had been dragged down here over years, maybe decades. But these weren't normal predation remains. Every single bone had been cracked open for marrow extraction. The larger bones showed tool marks where they'd been systematically broken at the joints. And most disturbing of all, every bone surface showed acid damage, pitting and discoloration that suggested whatever lived here dissolved parts of its prey for easier consumption. "This is a feeding station," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something's been hunting on the surface and bringing prey down here to process." That's when Mike found the human remains. Tucked against the far wall, almost hidden under a pile of caribou bones, was a torn jacket with a National Park Service patch. The fabric was shredded as if by massive claws, but the name tag was still legible: M. Patterson, Park Ranger. Mark Patterson had disappeared 6 months ago while conducting a solo wildlife survey near Denali. Search and rescue teams had combed the mountains for weeks but never found a trace. Now we knew why. Something had been hunting humans along with the wildlife. "We need to get out of here right now," Mike said, but his words were cut off by a sound from deep below us. Scraping, rhythmic and deliberate. Something large moving through the tunnels beneath our position. The sound grew louder, closer. We could feel vibrations through the solid rock floor as whatever it was approached our location. My depth meter showed we were at 500 feet below surface level, but the sounds were coming from even deeper. This cave system went down much further than we'd realized. Mike made the call to retreat immediately, but when we reached the junction where our main tunnel connected to the passage leading toward the surface, we discovered that our exit route was blocked. A fresh cave-in had sealed the tunnel completely. Tons of rock debris filled the passage from floor to ceiling. But as we examined the collapse with our lights, something became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't caused by the earthquake. The rocks had been placed deliberately, stacked strategically to create an impenetrable barrier. We were trapped. "Check the alternate routes," Mike ordered, but we quickly discovered that 3 of the 4 passages we'd mapped were now blocked by similar collapses. We were being herded deeper into the cave system, away from the surface, toward whatever was making those scraping sounds below. That's when I saw the first creature. A shadow moved past the entrance to a side passage, just at the edge of my headlamp beam. Serpentine but massive, easily 20 feet long and 4 feet thick at its widest point. It moved with impossible speed and fluidity, its body undulating through the tunnel like a giant snake. But this thing had legs. Dozens of them. Each segment of its elongated the body sprouted 6 jointed limbs that ended in curved talons the size of kitchen knives. The head was the worst part. Elongated like a python, but equipped with massive mandibles that looked designed for crushing large bones. Even in the brief glimpse I caught, I could see rows of backward curved teeth inside that mouth, each one longer than my finger. This thing was built for hunting prey much larger than humans. Did everyone see that? Tommy's voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. Before anyone could answer, the lights began. Bioluminescent patterns started glowing along the creature's body segments. Electric blue and green pulses that traveled from head to tail in complex sequences. The patterns would pulse 3 times, pause, pulse 5 times, pause, then repeat. It was communicating. And something was answering. Responding light patterns appeared from tunnels all around us. We were surrounded by multiple creatures, all signaling to each other in their alien language of living light. The cave system lit up like a Christmas tree as the things coordinated their movements through bioluminescent conversation. Then the clicking started. Rapid-fire echolocation pulses, like nothing I'd ever heard. These creatures were mapping our exact positions, probably building 3-dimensional models of our bodies in their minds. They knew exactly where each of us was standing, how fast we were breathing, which direction we were facing. Sarah grabbed my arm. "They're hunting us!" The attack came from 4 directions simultaneously. Tommy screamed as something massive slammed into him from a side tunnel, knocking him backward into the bone pile. His headlamp spun wildly as claws raked across his chest, tearing through his heavy jacket like tissue paper. In the strobing light, I caught a glimpse of mandibles the size of a bear trap snapping shut inches from his face. Mike was trying to reach Tommy when another creature dropped from above, its talons sinking into his shoulders. The thing was impossibly long. Its head was clamped onto Mike, while its tail section was still emerging from a ceiling tunnel 20 feet away. Mike's screams echoed off the chamber walls as the creature began dragging him upward. Sarah was running for the main tunnel when a third creature burst from the wall itself, exploding through what I'd thought was solid rock. The tunnel wall crumbled away like cardboard, revealing a hidden passage and a creature whose bioluminescent patterns were strobing in aggressive reds and oranges. Sarah's scream cut off abruptly as mandibles closed around her waist. I dove for a crack in the chamber wall, a fissure I'd noticed earlier that was too narrow for the creatures, but just wide enough for a human body. The rocks scraped against my ribs as I squeezed through, listening to my teammates being torn apart behind me. Tommy's screams lasted the longest. The wet, crunching sounds lasted even longer. The fissure led to a network of natural limestone cracks, too small for the engineered tunnels, too narrow for the creatures to follow. I crawled through spaces barely wider than my shoulders, following a slight air current that meant the cracks connected to the surface somewhere. But I could hear them hunting me. The creatures knew I was in the crack system, and they were trying to reach me. Scraping sounds echoed from parallel tunnels as they searched for intersections large enough to access. Several times, I heard rock being broken as they tried to widen openings. Their intelligence was terrifying. Rock. They were problem-solving, adapting their hunting strategy in real time. I crawled for 8 hours through absolute darkness. My headlamp battery died after the first hour, and I continued by feel alone. The rock tore my clothes and shredded my hands, but I could smell fresh air ahead. Surface air mixed with pine trees and snow. When I finally emerged, from a crack barely 3 feet wide, the sun was rising over the Denali peaks. I was 2 miles from our base camp, on the opposite side of the mountain from the main cave entrance. My radio was destroyed, my cell phone had no signal, and my emergency GPS beacon had been crushed during the crawl. It took me 6 hours to hike back to camp and another 4 hours to reach the nearest ranger station. By the time rescue teams mobilized, 16 hours had passed since the attack. The search and rescue operation lasted 3 weeks. They brought in specialized cave rescue teams from across Alaska, drilling equipment to create new access points, and enough gear to support extended underground operations. What they found made national news. The main cave entrance had been sealed by a precisely engineered collapse. Tons of rock had been placed to create an impenetrable barrier, but the placement was too strategic to be natural. Something with intelligence had sealed the cave from the inside. Using ground-penetrating radar, they mapped a tunnel system that extended over 12 miles in every direction, reaching depths of over 800 feet. The tunnels connected to natural cave systems throughout the mountain range, a network that could allow something to travel underground for hundreds of miles without ever reaching the surface. They found evidence of the creatures: shed skin fragments, claw marks, bite impressions in solid rock. Sarah's camera had survived the attack, and the final minutes of footage showed bioluminescent patterns moving in the darkness and audio of sounds that no known animal makes. But they never found my teammates. Just more feeding chambers, more bone piles, and tunnel extensions that led deeper into the mountain than any human could follow. The official report classified it as a cave-in accident with complications from aggressive wildlife. The footage was deemed inconclusive, and the physical evidence was attributed to unknown geological processes. But I know the truth, and so do the 3 other survivors from similar incidents that occurred within 6 months of our attack. Because this wasn't an isolated event. Similar encounters happened at newly opened cave systems across Alaska, XB. Always after significant earthquake activity. Always with the same pattern of coordinated attacks and engineered tunnel collapses. The creatures were spreading, following seismic events that opened new connections between their underground territories. I quit my job at the library and now work full-time monitoring seismic activity across Alaska. Every earthquake above magnitude 5 gets my immediate attention. I file detailed reports with the Park Service about potential cave dangers, and while most officials ignore me, a few rangers have started taking my warnings seriously. Because I know those things are still down there, hunting anything that ventures onto the surface above their territories. They're intelligent, organized, and they've been living under Alaska for longer than humans have existed. Every earthquake brings them closer to more populated areas. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I can hear scraping sounds in the walls. Probably just the building settling, but I sleep with my lights on anyway. Because once you've seen what lives in the deep places under Alaska, you never really feel safe in the darkness again. The creatures are still hunting, and now they know what humans taste like.